Fatal Frame, the story of a haunted mansion with a horrifying past. The source of its myriad ghosts and dark memories is the rituals that were performed here, and which failed to keep the darkness at bay. The focus of the story is on understanding and uncovering the truth of these rituals, but much of that truth is lost in the ancient past and in another cultural tradition. To truly understand these rituals and the role they play in Fatal Frame, we have to trace their roots back into the ancient history. And most of all, we must understand the religious traditions of Japan and the role they've played in developing the rituals of the Japanese people. What we consider as Shinto first began to be organized around the 600s, during a time when Japan as a nation was first being born. The country's various peoples had been fought, defeated, and absorbed or pushed northward, leading to a mostly unified country for the first time in its history. This led to the nation's first national government, the beginning of a written cultural history, and an influx of outside influences as other nations attempted to reach out to the Japanese court. Having come into contact with these nations with long histories and religious traditions, the Japanese needed their own matching history and traditions, which had to be cultivated from the many cultures and clans that now called themselves Japanese. The myths that were gathered from across Japan likely represented many blended traditions, which are hard to trace now. From these, Japan created its own canon and named its own tradition, using what was originally a Chinese term, Shinto. This ancient Shinto we'll categorize as the traditions primarily dealing with nature worship and the worship of gods considered native to Japan. They often centered around demarcating certain areas as holy and protecting these natural places, and later building and maintaining shrines for them. Ritual is one of the central elements of Shinto, developed over the course of centuries. In the Shinto sense, a ritual involves specific behavior and restrictions at a specific place and time by specific people, often involving purification, ritual offerings, and prayer, called norito. The point of these rituals can be broadly summarized as dealing with purity and impurity, the religion's primary worldly concern. In Shinto, it is impurity which causes the trouble of worldly life. Disease, famine, natural disaster, bad luck, all can be laid at the feet of impurity. Shinto is primarily focused upon rituals that cleanse impurity and encourage purity, and in doing so, protecting the country and the people from the evil that impurity can cause. Markers intended to indicate holiness are some of the most common in Shinto tradition. Rope called shimenawa is wrapped around trees, rocks, and other holy places. Their primary purpose is not to indicate holiness so much as to protect the holy object from evil or impure influences, acting as a kind of protective barrier. Tradition says it stems from the myth of Amaterasu and the cave. After the sun goddess was coaxed out of hiding, a sacred rope was hung over the cave to keep anyone from entering it. Hanging from shimenawa is typically a paper symbol shaped like a lightning bolt, called shide. It indicates holiness, specifically holy power. It is meant to represent thunder and the storm, calling on some of the most ancient and powerful kami figures. Shinto was the primary religious tradition, but it was in no way ironclad or unaccepting of new ideas. As travelers from other nations continued to enter Japan, new ideas and religious thought came with them, at times being absorbed by Shinto, at other times becoming new traditions that lived alongside native ones. These foreign ideas came from China, the three nations of what we now call Korea, and ancient India, via a long train of Buddhist transmission. Chinese thought would include with it many philosophic schools, like Confucianism and Taoism, neither of which would become as influential in Japan, but would still leave their mark. Buddhism would be the biggest one, and that we can divide into two primary traditions, the more traditional schools and the esoteric, the secretive, ritualistic schools. In Japan, this type of Buddhism was called Mikkyo. The term does not refer to a school of Buddhism so much as a kind of Buddhism. The schools of Mikkyo were Shingon and Tendai, and both would grow heavily influential in the Japanese court and aristocratic circles in the coming centuries. Along with religion and philosophy, these travelers from the continent also brought science and worldly knowledge with them. Some of the most important and most needed were the calendar and astronomy, neither of which had gained much traction in Japan as of yet. The nation was new and had had no government to organize calendars in years past. And as a nation with little seafaring, studying the stars had not been a priority. But with the inclusion of Buddhism as an element of religious life, a tradition with heavy use of the calendar for the timing of its rituals, the need for an understanding of the sky, the seasons, and the passing of the year was suddenly very important. This would develop into a government office centered on the calendar and studying the stars, along with monitoring the passing of the hourly time via a water clock, and later even more esoteric things which became associated with their studies: divination, spellcasting, banishing evil spirits. This office was the Onmyodo. This was a dedicated group of government officials who practiced Onmyodo, or the way of yin and yang. As scholars assigned to learn continental skills, they quickly became specialists educated in a wide swath of Chinese, Korean, and Indian traditions, not only astronomy, but also philosophy, divination techniques, folk beliefs, and medicine. All these techniques were blended into a unique tradition, which would become a framework for a wide variety of magical rituals and techniques. As students of the stars, Onmyoji were particularly associated with star deities. They worshipped the gods of the directions, the Hasojin, a group of 8 deities who represented the 8 points of a compass. There was also the 4 symbols, originally a set of Chinese constellations, who served as the guardians of the north, south, east, and west. In Japanese, they are known as Genbu, Byakko, Seiryu, and Suzaku. Related to the 4 symbols were the 5 elements, a belief that associates the known world with 5 building blocks that make up all of creation. In China, they are fire, water, earth, air, and metal, and each is associated with one of the 4 symbols. The symbols are actually 5. A 5th, the yellow dragon, represents the center of the sky. However, when these traditions came to Japan and blended with native thought, they altered somewhat. The 5 elements of Japan are fire, water, earth, air, and a 5th term, Sora, which can be translated as sky, void, or emptiness. It is the concept of nothing, like a great empty sky overhead, and as nothing, it has no god representing it. The focus on 8 directions and the 9th central space gives Onmyodo a heavy association with the number 9. The number represents all of creation, which is contained in all the directions. Physically, it is represented by a set of squares organized in a 3x3 grid. This grid is seen as the Earth's layout and is used as a diagram in divination. Through studying the sky and natural phenomena, it was up to the Onmyoji, the Onmyodo practitioner, to determine possible future events and give proper instructions as to how to either avoid disaster or encourage blessing. They were diviners, using their knowledge of the stars to tell the future, and in coming centuries they would also defend that future by using their magical abilities to influence it. Ceremonies developed which would protect against coming ill fortune. Other ceremonies would invite good fortune in and bless the recipient. Of course, these rituals had to be done well and carefully. To perform these rituals improperly, or with the wrong conduct, could involve backlash and invite evil energies. A good deal of this tradition involved taboos or kinki. The stars above were not simply stars, they were deities who moved through the skies. As they moved, they influenced the world, and it was considered inauspicious to cross the deity's path. Thus, at certain times as the stars moved, certain directions became taboo for a while. This was a major element in use of the calendar. Figuring out where the stars would be when let people know long in advance when they would be allowed to travel. Over centuries, desperate times would develop the Onmyoji's role in new ways. A series of plagues, famines, and natural disasters brought the nation low. Explanations for this suffering went so far as to blame angry spirits returning for vengeance, particularly Sugiwara no Michizane, a politician falsely accused of wrongdoing who died in exile. After his death, disasters followed one after another, including lightning striking the house of Sugiwara's enemies. Rumors ran wild, claiming that the man's spirit was enacting his revenge. It developed into the concept of the Goryo, what in the modern day we know as the Onryo, or vengeful spirit. The rites that Onmyoji used to influence spirits would become rituals to pacify spirits, and since the natural world was the world of the gods, and the gods were behind natural events, it's just a step further to consider using rituals to try and settle natural disasters. Some of the earliest rituals to defend against ill omen were related to fires in the capital city. Rituals meant to defend against these calamities were called Kasai Matsuri, or calamity rites. This era of suffering and fear gave the Onmyoji prestige. They were who you turned to in truly disastrous times. Even after the official government office was closed in 820, the traditions would continue, and people kept up the practice of seeking out diviners to protect against disaster. Many of the Onmyodo's rituals and practices were adapted and kept alive by Mikkyo Buddhist practitioners, who replaced the office of the Onmyodo as the central magical practitioners for the government. The Mikkyo traditions of Buddhism were secret traditions. It was believed that the written word and teachings could only go so far in truly bringing understanding to the practitioner. For this reason, art and the mandala found heavy use here, and much of what these traditions thought was very different compared to their traditional exoteric counterparts. In a broad sense, traditional Buddhism believes that this world is illusory, and enlightenment is to be found in nirvana, in escaping the cycle of rebirth that traps us in this world. To achieve this, the practitioner must live by Buddhist laws, practice certain mental and physical techniques, and achieve moral and intellectual improvement. Mikkyo traditions descend from the less traditional Buddhist schools. Let's consider the Shingon school. In this tradition, enlightenment is not something that exists far away in another existence. Enlightenment is something we all have, but have lost, due to the distractions and poisons of this world. We have to cleanse ourselves, to clear off the foul things that have discolored our spirits, to set free the enlightenment that is already inside us. In Shingon terms, enlightenment is referred to as Jobutsu, becoming the Buddha in this body. Thus, another way to refer to enlightenment is Buddha nature. We all have the nature of the Buddha inside us. In fact, not only humans, but all of existence has Buddha nature. Because we are all made of the same elements, we all share the same existence. We too must share the Buddha nature. Everything that exists is part of that nature. And when we are properly enlightened, when we have cleansed ourselves, we can exist properly as part of this great net of enlightenment and life. The 5 elements are a primary piece of this train of thought. General philosophic thought says all of creation is made out of combinations of the 5 elements. Shingon thought goes further. If everything is made of the elements, and everything is Buddha nature, then the elements themselves are Buddha nature. They become a potent metaphor for the Buddhist, who can use their universality to further argue for the universality of Buddhahood. In Mikkyo Buddhism, these 5 elements gain a plethora of associations with the gods, the stars, and sacred writings. The sacred writing was a Sanskrit language which came to Japan via Buddhism, known as Siddham. It is no longer used in its homeland, but kept alive by Mikkyo Buddhist traditions, who still use it to write sutras, to create mandalas, and more. Every god and Buddha is given a specific seed syllable, or bija, that represents their existence, as well as specific mantras or sacred prayers, all of them written in Siddham. These complex and intertwined pieces of Japanese tradition are all heavily influential in Fatal Frame. Each of them plays a role in understanding the rituals of the Himuro family, Much like real Japanese history, the religious traditions of this family are a blend of influences, taking pieces of Onmyodo, Mikkyo, traditional Buddhism, and Shinto thought to create the nightmarish traditions of Himuro Mansion. But why are these rituals aimed specifically at a singular concern? And why is that concern the underworld? In truth, the fear of hell has a long history in Japan. From the medieval era, Japanese people have been terrified of falling into hell, primarily because their religious leaders were telling them to fear it. During the Heian period onward, religious figures began preaching on the dangers of certain behaviors and the threat of falling into hell due to them. They were heavily based on Buddhist prohibitions against killing, any form of killing, including fishing, hunting, even tilling the land, which would kill insects in the ground. What were the people to do? Well, the trick was, these actions were forgivable when done in service of the shrines and temples of Japan, which were government bodies led by the emperor. It was a form of social control. The temples and shrines often owned large amounts of land, and they were in need of a workforce to farm and maintain it. The fear of hell was meant to discourage the peasant populace from leaving the area or trying to earn a living on their own. Instead of a fisherman selling his catch himself, he gives it to the temple, who sells it for a profit. That saves his soul and keeps him from competing with those in power. These political and economic concerns gave rise to a near obsession with the idea of hell and the fear of it. And centering the story of Fatal Frame around a mouth to hell fits this ancient tradition, wherein hell is a horrifying fate, only waiting for us to fall in. The presentation of the Hell Gate and its associated locations relates to Japanese thoughts about hell. In Onmyodo, the northeast direction is unlucky and impure. It is the Demon Gate, or Kimon, the entrance through which spirits enter this world. It must be defended against. Then, the path that leads further down, called the Banned Path in English, is the Kinki no Chikado in Japanese, literally a taboo path, using the same term used in Onmyodo tradition. The dangerous energy that emanates from hell, the malice, is called shoki in Japanese. It's often translated into English as miasma, as it is a somewhat similar concept. In the medieval era, it was believed bad air could cause disease, and this ties into the Japanese belief that impurities were the source of illness and general bad luck. The underworld is impure. The very myth which explains purity and impurity includes a journey to the underworld and a purity ritual after. All of Shinto is centered around the concept of purity and protecting against the impure, and the underworld is the worst of it. The rope ritual is what protects the world from the dangers of Yomi, the underworld. The idea of rope as protection against impurity comes from the Shimenawa, and the many ghosts we see wearing Shimenawa and Shide were likely wearing them for the same purpose. During the ritual, the family joins the sacrifice in front of the gate to hell. They must wear the ropes to protect themselves from the shoki. The ropes in Fatal Frame are called shikinawa. It translates to ceremonial rope. Shimenawa is a combination of the kanji sherushi, meaning mark or sign, and nawa, meaning rope. Read as shime, it means cordoning off. Shiki, in a compound word, means ritual or ceremony. Where shimenawa is meant to cordon off something holy to protect it from outside evil energy, the shikinawa is laid against the door to hell to keep evil energy in. The term used to refer to sealing the hell gate is fuin, the same term used to refer in Shinto tradition to sealing the family shrine when there's a death in the family, to protect the gods inside from the impurity in the household. The use of blood in the ritual is a unique one, and something that isn't used in traditional Shinto, so far as we know. If there were officially sanctioned human sacrifice rituals in what we think of as Shinto, it happened so long ago as to be near impossible to trace. It's not something considered proper for the divine. Blood is a kind of impurity called red pollution, as opposed to black pollution relating to dead bodies. The kami do not like blood, so shedding it in a ritual dedicated to the kami or in a place of worship would go against Shinto tradition. That's why this ritual doesn't involve a god or a shrine. Instead, it is underground, the traditional location of yomi in Japan, and the focus is the rope and the door, rather than anything considered sacred. The performers of this ritual are the family head and the 4 priests of the Himuro family. The priests are referred to as shinkan in Japanese, whenever they're referenced in notes. As spirits, they are Kubinashi Shinkan no Rei, or headless priest spirits. The term is an older-fashioned term for a Shinto priest, still used in the modern age, but only to refer to those who are priests at Ise Shrine. My guess is that these may be the only government-appointed roles in the modern day. In past centuries, Shinkan referred to any priest working in an official position at the shrines, which were government-appointed jobs at the time. It likely means these priests and the shrine at Himuro Mansion are part of the larger government structure and were official appointments. We can learn a little more about Fatal Frame from these priests by considering the words they write. First, there are the personal works, called priest's writing in English, and the Shinkan no Shirushigaki in Japanese. The word implies these are notes, not necessarily a diary or journal, so much as a quick jotting down of info. Then there are the priest's manuals, or the Shinkan Oboegaki. The term Oboegaki is used in historical studies to refer to a specific type of historical document, a diary or personal record of some kind. The Japanese have a long tradition of keeping diaries, enough so that nearly every era has multiple prominent diaries as part of the literary canon. Most of the language in these documents is pretty similar to its English translation, but a few words give extra context. The first priest's manual describes what happens to the dead souls that come into contact with malice, saying they will never achieve Buddhahood. The term used in Japanese for Buddhahood is Jobutsu. This implies the tradition in the mansion is a Mikkyo one, since Jobutsu is Buddhahood in the body now, as opposed to the more traditional Buddhist nirvana, called Nihon in Japanese. Then, when the English says the souls will be bound to this world, the Japanese specifically says these souls, tamashi, will be earthbound, chi, using a term for earth that implies not just this world, but specifically the ground, the soil, the earth beneath our feet. The Japanese phrase for the non-hostile spirits players can take pictures of is Tenjo Nibaku Reichi, or earthbound spirits. The Jibakure is an earthbound spirit. They are the dead who died suddenly or in especially violent or cruel ways, who are unaware they are dead. They continue to linger near the land or building they died in for months, years, or centuries. The concept is similar to the Western idea of a haunting. These spirits in Fatal Frame do not present a threat to the player, only a hindrance, since many of them relate to locked doors. They are simply trapped here, unaware they are dead. By comparison, the ghosts which attack the player are called Akurio and are much more violent and unfriendly. The term means evil spirit and is primarily associated with Buddhism and to an extent Christianity in Japan. A third type of spirit is the Hitomi Gaku, or human sacrifice. There are at least 2 of these earthbound spirits called Vengeance in English, who are specifically referred to as a type of sacrifice, Hito Bashira, which implies they were killed during construction of the Himuro Mansion. Once the malice was released, these formerly protective spirits became corrupted. Let's take a look at the documents, pieces of writing found throughout the mansion which describe the religious rituals of the household. In Japanese, these are called komonjo. It means ancient literature writing and refers to texts written before the Meiji era. Historians further divide them between diaries and letters, things written for personal use and things written to be read or instructive to someone else. This is clearly the latter. In Japanese, the text is written in a unique fashion. Alongside the kanji, the writer uses katakana instead of hiragana. This may be a way of indicating the age of the document, or perhaps it is a ceremonial style. The komonjo documents are written in a specific style on a specific paper. You can see that reflected in the different icons used for the documents versus journal entries and newspapers. The paper is called washi, traditional Japanese paper, and the text is written in the tategami style, vertically. These official documents detailing the traditions of the family give us some insight into how they view elements of the rituals. The shrine maiden is referred to as Mikkyo in the document on binding, a term for a Shinto shrine maiden. Moreover, in Japan's ancient past, when human sacrifice was practiced, it's believed the shrine maiden was one of two kinds of people who were primarily sacrificed to the gods. Both types were considered to be holier than the average person. Besides the Mikkyo, the other sacrifice was the traveler from far away, known in Japanese as kyakujin. While it meant literally someone visiting the village, in a mythological sense, it was used to refer to visitors from the other world, Tokoyo, the land of the gods. These visitors were seen as holy, and the term kyakujin is used in the priest's writings to refer to Kyrie's ill-fated lover, who is also killed by the priests. In the 5 Buddha documents, we see the 5 limbs of the shrine maiden referred to as gotai. In Japanese philosophic thought, gotai refers to the head, neck, chest, hands, and feet, which are considered the 5 parts of the body which make it whole. This ties into the general magic focus on the number 5 and its association with the elements, the gods, and the stars. The wording of the document gives a little insight into the use of the small Buddha statues. In Japanese tradition, when a person dies violently or tragically, offerings of certain objects may be given in order to pacify the spirit. It's a form of protection to keep the spirit happy, and placation in sympathy to the tragic spirit. The language in Japanese implies these Buddhas were meant to pacify her spirit. It tells the reader to mourn for the woman, tomorai, and then to offer the 5 Buddhas as sacrifices to her mitama, her sacred spirit. The way these statues are offered seems to relate to Onmyodo tradition. The 3x3 frame of 9 boxes resembles the Onmyodo symbol. In the strangling ritual document, the writer explains how the maiden cut off from the outside world is to be killed. In Japanese, the term used to refer to the world is gensei. It can be literally translated as this life. In Buddhist terms, it is used to refer to one of the 3 lives: the past life, the next life, and this life. It implies a kind of illusory impermanence to the world. In Shinto terms, gensei can be used to refer to this world as opposed to the world of the gods, Tokoyo. Then there's the calamity document. The word translated as calamity here is wazawai. The kanji used implies not just disaster or calamity, but wickedness, a kind of evil disaster. Elsewhere, the term used is sayaku, which can also be translated as disaster or calamity, combining the kanji for an act of God or disaster with misfortune or unlucky. This document seems to have had the biggest change. In English, the failed ritual leads to malice escaping and people die. That cuts out a line in the original Japanese, which states that the malice escaping angers the gods, and then people die. The term used to refer to gods is jigami, combining the words for earth and spirit. Having considered the notes of the priests, let's take a look at their ceremonial objects, the carvings and the masks. Much of the game involves finding carvings and using them to unlock doors. The 5 carvings seem to imply these objects each belong to a singular priest, were his mark of office and the only way to fully unlock the ritual locations. This meant the ritual was impossible to complete without each one. They all had to be willing and able. When you fight the spirits of the priests, their defeat reveals a symbol floating over their face, the same symbol which appears on the carvings, confirming the ownership of the various objects. The carvings also appear on the wall holders which hold the masks, associating them with a singular priest. The term translated as carving in English is kokuseki, carved stone. Each one has a siddham symbol on the front, and each is associated with a priest and a mask. The first night, the player obtains the black carving, or Genbu no Kokuseki, found in the abyss, and uses it to open the door to Narukami's shrine. Its symbol is associated with the joyful mask, and both belong to the priest who is fought in the square garden. What's most important about this particular object is its name, Genbu, a term that specifically means black tortoise. It's the name of one of the 4 divine guardians, the constellations that are so important in Onmyodo. This implies that the 4 symbols belonging to the priests are associated with the 4 symbols of the constellations, though only this one is named for one. The name of the joyful mask also alludes to Japanese religious thought. Each mask is named for one of the mitama, the 4 elements of spirit in Shintoism. The joyful mask, or Yorokobi no Men, can be associated with the Kushi mitama, or joyful spirit. On the second night, the player finds the blue carving, Ashoku no Kokuseki. It has a similar name to the teal carving, the Heki Shoku no Kokuseki. Both can be translated as blue, but the teal carving, whose kanji contains the symbol for white, is a paler color. The importance of the colors relates to the possibility they are associated with the 4 symbols. The blue carving could be related to the azure dragon, whose color is a blue-green, while the teal carving would be the white tiger, whose color is in the name. The blue carving is found in the backyard and opens the door in the rubble room, leading to the gateway to the underground. It's associated with the angry mask and the priest who died in the backyard. The angry mask, or Ikari no Men, relates to the Ara mitama, or angry spirit. The purple carving is found in the abyss. In Japanese, its name appears to be the name of a Japanese hydrangea. It's known for its purple and red colors, possibly associating the carving with the vermilion bird, the symbol whose color is red. The associated mask is the happy mask, or Tanoshimi no Men, and the priest is the one buried in the cherry atrium. Then the gold carving, or Yamabuki no Kokuseki. It also appears to be named for a flower, and yellow is the color of the yellow dragon, the Chinese 5th symbol representing the center of the sky. The flower is known as Caria japonica, which blooms from September to October. A single bloom has 5 petals, though a yae or multi-bloom flower also exists. It can be found across Japan, growing on mountain slopes and forests. In Fatal Frame, you can find large vases of bright yellow flowers in the Buddha room, against the back wall and near the statue, presumably meant to be Yamabuki. The gold carving is associated with the sad mask, and the priest fought in the abyss. The sad mask is the Kanashimi no Men, and relates to the Nigi mitama, or sad spirit. Of the 4 spirits, the Nigi and Ara are the oldest and more important. Some theories state that other spirits were later additions centuries after the development of the Ara and Nigi. These 2 spirits represent the angry and peaceful sides of the gods. As nature spirits, these gods were both incredibly dangerous and important. The land provided food and water humans needed to survive, but it also caused earthquakes and floods, famines, and storms. The Ara and Nigi mitama represented this dual element of the divine soul, which could protect and destroy, making the 2 priests associated with these spirits the likely most important of the 4. The last carving is the teal carving, whose symbol is the same one that appears on the Master's seal, on the Hanya mask the Master wears, and it appears in large on the door leading to the underground. This makes this the Master's object, possibly associating him with the white tiger. Let's consider the actual rope ritual, and the order in which these objects might be used. They unlock Narukami Shrine, the Moon Shrine, the Buddha Room, the door to the Demon Mouth, and the Demon Mouth itself. First would be the Buddha Room. In flashbacks, we see the whole family gather to observe the ritual. To begin, they must have gathered in one place, and the Buddha Room seems the best location as a place of worship associated with the maiden. It's also where the player must find 4 ropes on the Buddha statues. Are these ropes related to the ritual performance? Or is the ritual itself something done before the actual ritual? I think this place, central to the maiden's permanent home, has to be where everything begins. Next must be the Moon Shrine, since the maiden must enter it the night before the ritual. It wouldn't be strange to think the family or priests would spend that time in the Buddha Room, performing purity rituals or praying for the maiden, while she remained in the well for the night. To enter the shrine, not only do you need the teal carving related to the Master, but also the Master's seal, which has the same symbol on it. It is called the Toshu no Akashi. Akashi can mean evidence or proof, but in Buddhist terms, it means enlightenment. Then there's the corridor and the demon mouth in that order, so the family can enter into the underground. The priests gather the maiden, enter the central chamber, and the ritual is performed. Lastly must be the Narukami Shrine. We see in flashbacks the holy mirror was originally held there, and it's important to the ritual. However, it is not present at the ritual itself, perhaps because it is the body of the kami, and it is a holy object in Shinto tradition, and must not be exposed to blood. Instead, the rope ritual happens first, and then the holy mirror is transferred from the shrine to the gate. It must be a temporary presentation due to the impurity of the underground and the fact it's found in the shrine. So perhaps the Narukami shrine is opened and the mirror brought out after the ritual, and it is carried with the family to the gate when they go to hang the ropes. Then when they leave, it is brought back with them. The last mask used in the ritual is the reflection mask worn by the master, called Ni Sugata no Men, which can translate to likeness mask. It is a plain-looking, almost see-through mask, which can transform into any of the other masks in the family. It is essentially representative of nothing. It is the central Japanese element, the Sora, meaning the family master is associated with the element of nothing in the center of the sky. This doesn't match the teal carving. The gold carving appears to represent the center, but this may be a case in which two traditions are meshed together somewhat messily. After all, yellow as the center color is a Chinese idea, while nothing as the center is a Japanese one. The importance of the mask relates to the role of the family master. The mask is a kind of safeguard. It is blank so long as the master's heart is pure. He too must be a kind of Buddha, removed from impurities and worldly desires. So long as this is true, the mask remains blank. Should evil overcome him, it transforms into the mask of a demon, which resembles a no mask called the Hanya. The Hanya is a family of masks which represent vengeful female spirits or women transforming into demons in no plays. There are various colors and styles. The master's mask appears to be a white Hanya, with a closed mouth as opposed to an open one with a protruding tongue. The mask is said to reflect both sadness and anger. The white is considered dignified. Another important element of the mask and the others used by the priests are their gender. In No, men don't typically wear masks. Most young men and warriors are barefaced. Only those who play characters that are very young or very old wear male masks. Otherwise, the mask characters are typically spiritual, demonic, female, or all of the above. These masks, worn by male priests, representing elements of the universe and the spirit or mitama, may relate to the female sacrifice herself, perhaps intended to be representations of her spirit, an idealization meant to inspire her to Buddhahood. The happy mask resembles the masks used for young women, in particular the ko-omote, meant to resemble a noble girl of 15 or 16 on the verge of adulthood, the youngest of the masks and a symbol of purity. The happy mask has an open mouth, a visible row of teeth that looks somewhat shadowed, like the black-stained teeth of a noblewoman. It also has the high, painted eyebrows of the nobility. The sad mask resembles the uba, an old woman. This specific variety is often used to portray the female member of a divine couple, or the symbolic, modest, harmonious wife. Like the sad mask, the uba has slightly closed, lowered eyes, a partially open mouth, with heavily outlined cheeks and wrinkles. Between the two masks, the happy and sad, represent both ends of the ideal life, innocent, pure youth, and demure old age. The joyful mask resembles a style of okina mask called the kokushikijo. The okina are a specific category of mask, which are older than the art of No itself. They originated in New Year's rituals. Some say it is the first mask created in Japan. This one is black in color, with a wide smile and spirals on its cheeks, like the joyful mask. Some varieties of okina also have a small beard, like this mask. The angry mask represents one of the koshin category, or masks that represent mythical creatures. Specifically, the kobeshime, a closed-mouthed, wide-eyed mask with heavy brows, may be the inspiration for the angry mask. It is used for infernal or hell spirits in No plays. These four masks, worn by the priest, represent the young and old woman, the male deity and male demon. There is a fifth, however, which hangs upon the blinding room door and isn't worn by others. It resembles another kishin or demon mask, the otobide, with big round eyes and an open protruding mouth. It was meant to represent the vengeful spirit of Sugiwara no Michizane, the first Onryo. It is considered the opposite of the kobeshime, the mask which lets us into the secret hallway. Narukami Shrine is known as Narukami Jinja in Japanese, a word most heavily associated with Shinto shrines. In the ancient world, the symbol was read as Kamusu Yashiro, or Mori, both of which meant a god grove, a sacred forest. That is where we find this shrine, in a forest atop a mountain, just like the oldest shrines in Shinto tradition. The lore of the game tells us that 5 gods came to this region and protected it against the Hellgate, and before leaving gave the people here a set of mirrors to keep the malice at bay. This is a place where a god once stood, or descended, as is said in many Japanese myths. Stories of gods entering this world from the world of the gods often focus on the location of their descent as a holy place, long after the god has returned to Tokoyo, the land of the gods. But which gods exactly are involved in these rituals and the protection of this land? 5 is a rather potent number in Japanese tradition, in Buddhism and Shinto. We could look to the 5 Tathagatas, or wisdom Buddhas, of Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism, or the 5 wisdom kings, the wrathful emanations of the wisdom Buddhas in Japanese tradition, particularly in Mikkyo Buddhism. But we have more than just the number 5 to go off of. There are, after all, actual Buddha statues and deities to be found in Fatal Frame. There are 2 styles in particular. The first being the Buddha statue item the player finds, which resembles the large Buddhas in the Buddha Hall. Then there is the statue found in the cabinet in the hall itself, which appears very different in comparison. The statues seen more often are of a standing Buddha, arms at the side, one raised and one lowered. The lotus base is common to statues of all kinds, representing enlightenment, and the large circular shape behind it likely represents a halo of light, representing holiness. The style seems to heavily resemble statues of the Gakko Bosatsu, one of a set of 2 guardians who protect Yakushi, the Buddha of healing. Typically, Gakko Bosatsu is a white figure standing with the left hand forming a fist at the waist, the right hand raised and holding either a round object or a lotus flower. The name translates to Moonlight Bodhisattva, the companion to the Sun Bodhisattva. There's not much of a rich history or canon to these figures, beyond their role as guardians to the medicine Buddha, but it seems clear why this figure was chosen, given Fatal Frame's focus on the moon as part of the ritual. The statue inside the cabinet is very different, a standing figure holding a sword overhead in a fierce pose, with a halo of what seems to be flames behind them. It resembles the fierce deity Buddha statues, such as Fudo Myo, who typically is seen with a halo of flames and a sword at his side. Let's consider the word Jigami, which appeared in a note in the game. The general term Earth God could be understood in many ways. In the ancient myths, the division between gods of the heaven and gods of the earth seemed to relate to the wars which pacified and absorbed various cultures. The cultures who were defeated became Earth gods, their original myths lost. It was thought these were gods of the land who submitted themselves to the rule of the gods of the heavens, led by Amaterasu. It might also quite literally relate to the gods who rule Earth, most relevant to the farmers who had to rely on the earth to survive. On certain days, it was taboo to till the soil. On those days, farmers gathered in worship to honor the earth god of their region. Stone towers are built to honor these gods, who are typically referred to as earth god, though other terms include Otomi Sojin, or great august traveler god, Kenro Chijin, robust earth god, and Chi Sumeragi, earth emperor. It's clear the god of earth is associated not just with the ground and the farmland, but with the road and the traveler as well. The statues to the earth god are associated with a set of 5 gods, whose names tend to be carved onto the statues. They include Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, Okokinushi, god of earth, Sukuna Bikona, god of medicine and agriculture, Uka no Mitama, goddess of food, and Hani Yasuhime, spirit of earth and clay. The prevalence of the earth god and its importance to farming communities makes clear why the earth god as a concept is associated with the ritual. Yomi is underground. The entrance to that world is under the earth, and the earthquake is the sign of the protection weakening. The underworld is heavily associated with earth, and so are the rituals associated with it. The rope maiden spends an evening underground in a well beneath the moon. Earth is as important to the tradition as the moon itself. We should also consider the possible connection to Buddhism, the association of the Buddha Samantabhadra with the earth god. In Mahayana Buddhism, Samantabhadra is one of the 3 great bodhisattvas, the patron of the Lotus Sutra, one of the tradition's most famous. In Japan, known as Fugen Bosatsu, the figure became important to Mikkyo traditions, and the association with the Lotus Sutra became very important for a certain demographic. Traditional Buddhism does not believe in the salvation of women. To be born as a woman is to be born in a lower form. To receive enlightenment, you must first be reborn as a man. This subordinate position has been a major struggle in the Buddhist communities of many cultures, and over time certain texts emerge and began to evolve the tradition's ideas of gender. The Lotus Sutra was one of those. It argued that women could also achieve enlightenment, which gave the women of Japan a particular fondness for the deity who presided over the sutra. Fugen Bosatsu became the patron of women, and in esoteric traditions, he represents bodhicitta, the desire to pursue enlightenment. The Himuro family's tradition is unique. The associations of Buddhahood with a woman, going back centuries into ancient history, stands out as unlike traditional Buddhism. That alone is our first hint that the family practices Mikkyo traditions, because it allows for enlightenment not just in this life, but for either men or women. And the Himuro family traditions definitely associate the rope maiden with the Buddha, not just with Shinto holy traditions as a Mikkyo. Language used in the game to refer to her, and to locations relating to her ritual, are very Buddhist. The bodies of sacrificed maidens are mummified in a style similar to Buddhist mummies, and certain subtle elements seem to hint at it too. In the Buddha room, 4 statues with 4 damaged limbs appear to represent the maiden, but a 5th maimed statue is missing. The statue in the cabinet is not damaged and seems unrelated to the other statues. But if you consider the 4 statues as the limbs, the maiden becomes the head, because she is in the secret room above the Buddha room. She is the 5th Buddha, and in particular, she is associated most with Gakko Bosatsu. Those statues are offered to her dead body to placate her spirit. The moon bodhisattva is perhaps what the maiden is meant to become, an enlightened one who is one with the moon. The moon is central to understanding this ritual, in part because it was central to the ancient Japanese sense of time and season. In the era of these early rituals, the Japanese lived by a lunar calendar, and that knowledge tells us a lot about the meaning of the ritual's placement in time. The Japanese lunar calendar followed the full cycle of the moon, beginning with a new moon, leading into the 15th or middle of the month, the full moon, and then followed by the end of the cycle in another new moon, with months alternating between 29 and 30-day lengths. And nearly all Shinto rituals were heavily tied into these months and the cycles of the moon. Modern names for the months are literally a number and moon, such as Ichigatsu, first moon, or Hachigatsu, 8th moon. Over the centuries, many calendars were adopted, nearly all of them lunisolar, until the Gregorian was adopted in the modern day. But many of the old traditions remain. The rituals of Fatal Frame are centered on the 11th and 12th months, or November and December. The biggest event of this time of year is the New Year's celebration, which in the ancient world were incredibly detailed, taking over 2 weeks of rituals and celebrations. These rituals began, according to some sources, on the 15th day. Others say it was the 13th day. This is likely due to changing calendars and the shifting moon cycle, and varying traditions in different places. Either way, it's clear the choice of time for the rituals is meant to associate them with this time of year, the New Year's celebration. From the middle of the month to the middle of the next month, the family would gather and celebrate a new beginning, and it's likely during this celebratory family gathering the Himuro family would be performing the rope ritual. The maiden is placed in the well on the 12th night. The actual ritual occurs on the 13th. The 13th of December was considered an Oni day in terms of Japanese lucky and unlucky days. Oni days are auspicious. Because of that luck, the day was chosen as the day to welcome in the gods and celebrate the new year. Every 10 years, in the 11th month, the family gathers together, and 4 children are chosen to play demon tag in the demon mouth on the 26th day of the month. This is the demon tag ritual, or Oni Asobi no Gishiki, the first of the rituals that occur every 10 years, likely in coordination with the 5 Gods festival that occurs at the same time. In Japanese tradition, November is the beginning of winter, the time when the gods leave and the natural world dies for a season. Winter is the time of the impure, the unlucky, associated with the yin and the dark elements of the natural order. The demon tag ritual occurs on the 26th, and going by the modern calendar, is a full 20 days before the 12th when the maiden descends into the well. This might relate to older Japanese timekeeping traditions. Months were divided into jun, or 3 sets of about 10 days. This might be a way of keeping a kind of buffer between the darker events of the later ritual and the children who partake in the first ritual. The children have a very specific age, at least 7 years, 9 months, and 25 days. Traditionally, Japan measured birthdays by the new year, with everyone gaining a year as another one passed. In that case, it means they must be 7 years as of this year, and born before February of their birth year at least. In Shinto tradition, young children are not completely of this world. They are God's children, their spirits so young and unformed that should they die, they shall simply become one with the natural world again, rather than becoming a human spirit. At 7, they come of age, passing the threshold into another stage of growth. This tells us something about the ritual. Truly young children are protected from participating, and those who are involved must be old enough to become spirits should or when they die. All those involved are women, of course, related to Shinto ideas that associate the yin, the spiritual world, and the woman. Their energy is most similar to the energy of the spirit world, allowing them to be closer to those spirits. The demon tag ritual reveals the next shrine maiden, who is immediately locked up. One note says she is imprisoned for 3,669 days. November 26th to December 13th, 10 years later, is exactly that amount of time. The blinded maiden, however, is likely left alone. In the flashbacks, it's an older woman who is blinded rather than a 7-year-old girl, so we can presume she is allowed some normalcy in her life. It's possible she's returned to her family, and only when everyone gathers again 10 years later is she blinded to take part in the ritual. The imprisoned shrine maiden would be kept from the outside world. 10 years later, she is taken to the moon well, and sits in moonlight for a full evening, purifying herself in order to prepare for the strangling ritual, or Sakinawa no Gishiki. Then, to enter the underground, she uses the hairpin, a symbol of a young woman's transition to adulthood in Japanese history, indicating she is now grown, having spent the entirety of her youth in isolation. Entering the underground, she is guided by the priests, followed by the rest of the family. What appears to be male members of the family are ringing bells that are shaped like vajra. In Japan, the objects primarily used as a ritual implement in Shingon, Hendai, and Zen traditions. They are associated with becoming Buddha and eradicating earthly desires. Ringing the bell and vajra during the walk to the wheel must be a reminder to the maiden of her duty. The shrine maiden is tied down to the wheel, from right arm to left, right leg to left. The right is the yang in Japanese thought, so this prioritizes the yang over the yin side of the body. Then the woman is pulled limb from limb, her blood consecrating the sacred ropes. Her body is kept by the family. A note in Fatal Frame 3 indicates that pieces of the deceased maidens were set into the house itself, much like the Hitobashira sacrifices, meant to defend the home against evil spirits. Let's consider the Buddha statues in Narukami Shrine. I think if the mirror is brought down into the underground after the ritual to separate it from the bloody event, and the limbs themselves are pacified by the use of the 5 Buddha statues, I think it's possible that this is when that event would occur. Directly after the ritual, some or all of the priests would leave with the body, taking it to Narukami Shrine or somewhere nearby, and then use the Buddha statues to pacify it in another ritual. Those statues are used to unlock the door that reveals the holy mirror, which could then be brought below to protect the family from the door. Then perhaps the family enters to perform the ceremony of the ropes, or Oshibari no Gishiki, meaning the honorable ritual of binding. Using the laceration rope, or sakinawa, the family master seals the door for another 10 years. The mirror's role in the ritual is made clear in the priest's manual, which states the mirror is to be placed before the open door, and the ropes are placed upon the door. It's possible that the door begins to open as the 10 years come to a close. The mirror may be the tool that represses the door so that it may be shut with the rope. Then once the rope successfully seals it, the mirror may return to its home in Narukami Shrine. The mirror is placed in a specific point called the Ko Kagamiwa, or Holy Mirror Rock. It's a plinth standing out of the ground, similar to many others found throughout the underground. and it connects the ritual once again to the earth itself. The mirror alone is not enough. It must stand at the proper height, bound to the rock that juts from the earth, which visually somewhat resembles earthen plinths created to honor the earth gods in Japanese tradition. The last time the ceremony was performed, the ritual failed. A great wave of malice escaped, and the doors started to open. The mirror shattered. At least 1,000 people died, likely including the family gathered for the ritual, as well as those living nearby or on the mountainside. In the aftermath, the family master fully succumbs to the evil of the gate, and we see him hunting down and beheading the priests. Having failed to perform the ritual properly, the family priests are punished in a samurai style. After having done so, the master commits ritual suicide before the family altar. Everyone is dead, and though the locals seem to have attempted to mourn and placate these spirits, their attempts are not enough, and the spirits continue to linger and grow in resentment. This becomes more dangerous over time, with many people being spirited away over the years, until the earthquake, when the doors appear to open more fully, and the protective mirrors in the outer shrines shatter.